Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, if you don't need it, you're good, man.
Good afternoon. I'd like to, on behalf of Dr. Hamre, the president of CSIS, welcome you all here this afternoon for our panel on press freedom in the Americas. My name is Michael Matera. I'm the new director of the Americas program here at CSIS. I see a lot of familiar faces out there, but for the people I don't know, I look forward to getting to know you over these next months and years. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the panel over to Andrew Schwartz, who is our Senior Vice President for External Relations and Press. Andrew is going to moderate the panel this afternoon, what I think is going to be a very, very interesting panel and interesting discussion. So, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Center for Strategic and International Studies this afternoon for a timely discussion of the state of press freedom in the Americas. First, we're very happy to acknowledge the President of Uruguay, former President of Uruguay, who is sitting right here. With your applause, will you please welcome him? Thank you. I probably shouldn't say it in this company, but I always root for Uruguay during the World Cup once the United States loses. My kids like Messi, though, so it's okay. We're also very happy today to be hosting Dr. Hector Magneto, who is the CEO of the Clarín Group in Argentina, who has played a critical role in standing up for press freedom in Argentina over the last 12 years of the Kirchner administrations. I'll just turn this down. Over the Kirchner administrations. The Kirchners were notorious for their use of intimidation as a tool against journalists and media organizations. Clarín stood up against this intimidation, and for his contribution to the defense of press freedom in his country, Dr. Magneto is being presented later today with a very prestigious award. It's the Freedom House Freedom of Expression Award. And with your applause, will you please help us congratulate Dr. Magneto on this well-deserved honor. Press freedom is at risk in much of the Americas. We're fortunate to have with us Ricardo Kirschbaum, general editor of the largest Spanish language newspaper in Argentina, Clarín. The government of Venezuela has fostered a climate of strong intolerance over the last decade under which violence against press has thrived. Venezuela is currently experiencing one of the most serious situations in its history. And today we have with us El Nacional's president and editor, Miguel Henrique Otero, who has been living in exile since 2015. We also have with us Hector Schamis, professor at Georgetown University and a weekly columnist for the Spanish newspaper El País, who is going to help put all of this in perspective for us. And last but certainly not least, we have the Washington Post's executive editor, Marty Baron, who is no stranger to issues surrounding press freedom and investigative journalism. The work that Marty and his team are doing at the Washington Post every day better helps us understand the world we live in. Just today, for example, Marty's Beijing bureau chief, my good friend Simon Denyer, published a fascinating story that's part of a series of examining China's internet censorship and surveillance. And Marty, I promise today I won't ask you what it's like to be the subject of an Oscar-winning film or what it's like to have the toughest guy in Hollywood perform as you. Okay. Promise. Today's panel couldn't be timelier or more interesting. In fact, we had United States Senator Tim Kaine here this morning, who something may be on the Democratic ticket next fall. Kaine spoke this morning here about cybersecurity, but he said twice during his remarks he wanted to stay so he could be here for this panel. So that should tell you something about how timely and how important these issues are. And it's such a timely discussion because, as Reporters Without Borders said just in April, for the first time, South America has fallen below Africa in the yearly rankings of press freedom. Also in April, Freedom House reported that press freedom throughout the world in 2015 declined to its weakest levels in 12 years because of attacks and intimidation by political, criminal, and militant forces that sought to mute or control the news media. Even in the United States, we face serious challenges. The federal government has launched investigations of leaks. Local governments are closing off access to previously public information. And a leading presidential candidate is proposing to make it easier to sue news organizations. So we're at a critical time when it comes to press freedoms, not just in the Americas, but all over the world. But first, we actually have some news today, so let's get right to it. 2 journalists have gone missing in a lawless region in Colombia, where security forces are already carrying out a massive search for a prominent Spanish journalist. President of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, said today. Hector, can you tell us more about the situation and how it relates to the overall picture that we're talking about here?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for being here. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be among such good friends. And yes, Andy, indeed, the event, the disappearance of 2 journalists in Colombia appears to be tragically timed to this panel, in which illustrates precisely the point of getting together and discussing these issues, which is the very adverse environment that journalists live in throughout the world. Of course, with gradations and different levels of violence and intimidation and safety for them, but nonetheless, I think that the topic it brings us together is common about the difficulties for freedom of the press, for exercising that fundamental constitutional freedom that we live today.
Marty, I'd like to turn to you first, but then have each one of you respond. What are the main reasons, in your view, of why press freedom has deteriorated over the past 10 years, not just in the Americas, but worldwide?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm a little embarrassed to be on the panel because the challenges that we face here in the United States pale by comparison with the challenges that are confronted by news organizations in the rest of the world, particularly in Latin America. So I hope my presence here does not suggest that somehow I view our own challenges as really as serious as those in Latin America and other parts of the world. What are the reasons that press freedom has deteriorated? I think it's because governments now have the opportunity to exercise greater power and are seizing that opportunity to exercise greater power. They recognize that the press represents a threat to them in the sense that true information represents a threat, and they see perhaps democracy itself as a threat. And so one of the first ways to snuff out democracy, to snuff out public discourse, is to go after the press. And these are institutions. They can be powerful institutions. They have resources, and if they can destroy the press, if they can undermine the press, if they can muzzle the press, then that sends a signal to the society at large that you're not to speak up against government. And there are plenty of tools that are available now. Certainly, people in the past have talked about the internet as a vehicle for promoting free expression. It turns out that the internet now is being used as a tool for extinguishing free expression because it offers government the opportunity to monitor expression to a degree that it could not before. And then it offers them an opportunity to sort of cut off those access points online.
Great. Miguel, let me ask you to respond to this question.
Well, we have this new phenomena in Latin America, which is populist authoritarian governments. Because what we were used to was the banana dictatorships, which were very direct, had very direct censorship and arbitrary policy against media. Now we have this phenomena of the populist authoritarian, which is they have in the long run the Cuban model, but in the middle they allow freedom of speech in media to a certain level, and we have seen what has been happening in Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Argentina. The system in Argentina broke down, so it changed. But in Venezuela, which is the origin of all this, what they have done is that they have been shrinking the freedom of speech to a level where right now 40% of the Venezuelan territory gets only public television, public radio. The other 60% gets auto-censor television or radio. And the newspapers, well, they have bought the biggest newspapers, except us. We never sold to them. We never accepted what they wanted. And the other newspapers, the supply of newsprint is controlled by the government. So right now we have 1/3 of our circulation, and other newspapers, or they disappear, or they have a small circulation and small paging. So what they allow a small space for freedom of speech, and they say, well, you just read El Nacional, and in Venezuela there is freedom of speech. Well, you read El Nacional, but I'm persecuted by the government. We don't have newsprint. We don't have public advertisement. We have all types of tax repression, etc., etc., etc. So it's this window goes smaller and smaller, and the tendency of the long run is one version of things. That's the official version. Of course, you have internet, and in Venezuela, when you have a country which has been in the global internet system, it's very difficult to censor that. Right now, there are 2,000 pages that are being blocked by the government. For instance, you cannot see NTN 24 in Venezuela, or Infobae. They have been blocked. And they block also Venezuelan pages. And with the social media, well, they go in a repression against people who take photos in the everywhere. So they are in about 10 of these 75 political prisoners are tweeters. So that's the situation.
We're going to come back to the situation and how you're dealing with it in just a second. But Ricardo, I want to ask you to weigh in on the same question. What are the main reasons why press freedom has deteriorated over the past 10 years in the Americas and worldwide?
Yo creo que hay una lucha histórica entre la restricción de libertades, que es permanente en regímenes donde la democracia no está consolidada, y que en la región se ha dado simultáneamente en varios países, con las consecuencias que estamos viendo y en distinto grado. Por supuesto que lo que está viviendo Miguel Henrique en Venezuela es, digamos, una de las fases más agresivas y concretas de este proceso, pero si uno recorre Venezuela, Ecuador, Brasil y la Argentina hasta el 10 de diciembre del año pasado, podrá encontrar rasgos comunes en cómo se recortan las libertades en función de consolidar un poder político. Y estos regímenes son posibles pensando en que van a ser perpetuos, porque cuando termina el ciclo, el derrumbe de todo el sistema y el régimen es casi completo. Por lo tanto, el principal objetivo de este tipo de gobiernos es controlar la prensa por medio de varias formas. Hay algo que se ha popularizado ahora en la Argentina, que es una imagen, una metáfora, diciendo que hay gobiernos que roban con la máscara del Che Guevara. Es decir, que son gobiernos que tienen una gran corrupción, sistema de corrupción interna y un fronting lleno de buenos propósitos. Y pienso que ese sistema populista degradado se está extendiendo en todo el mundo y está dando como producto inicial una línea de tensión muy fuerte con los medios de comunicación a quien tienen que controlar.
Thank you. Hector.
English or Spanish?
Whichever you please.
All right. Well, I'm going to continue in English just to be fair, two and two. But no, a couple of things that have been said already that I want to highlight. First, about Marty's point, well, by no means, his caveat, no, in the U.S. is a lot better. We know journalists are not assassinated as they are in Mexico on a daily basis. Nevertheless, I think still the topic is the same. When there are attempts to legislate against freedom of the press, we are in the same neighborhood already. And it better stop there, because then the next step might very well be a sort of a Latin American situation. About the Miguel Henrique's point, and Ricardo's to some extent, I think the key is this question of perpetuation. The attempts at perpetuation that happen in much of Latin America and still go on in some countries, but I can count 6, 7 countries in the Americas in the last 10 years with serious attempts at perpetuation: Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil of a party, not of a particular person, but a dominant party, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Ecuador. And when you're in that scenario, a journalist is a problem. It's a big problem for you. If you want to stay in power forever, which is what Ricardo was highlighting, well, free press is the biggest problem you face. Free press is the door to a society that will criticize, and that's obviously a problem for perpetuation. And I still think, therefore, the critical role of the free press cannot be exaggerated, especially in those contexts.
Great. Miguel, back to you. We're talking about Venezuela, and the notion that things could explode is the popular refrain that we hear often. El Nacional is one of the oldest news organizations. It was founded by your father more than 50 years ago. How have you been able to survive as the only major newspaper that's truly independent from the government, given all the scarce resources and the challenges that you're facing?
Well, it hasn't been easy. We have gotten to the modo sobrevivencia. All we do is just to survive, and we don't have any public advertisement, and the private advertisement which we do have is smaller and smaller every day, because they have destroyed the private sector. So we used to be 1,100 people working in El Nacional. Now we are 300, because all our products that are not essential, we just cut it down, like a popular newspaper, a free newspaper, all the magazine inserted in the newspaper, everything we shut it down. We have a circulation which is 1/3 of what it should be. People cannot buy the newspaper very easily, because there is a shortage of newspaper, and we have 16 pages every day. We used to have 80 or 90 pages. So we are on a surviving mode. Of course, the internet is very good for us, because we have more than 4 times the traffic we had before, and right now we are the main news source for Venezuela everywhere, because of the internet. But it's not easy, because right now I cannot go there. All our directors board has the same situation that I have. The editorial board is in the same situation as I am. Well, for the journalists, it's not easy. There are no access to public sources, and they have to take care of themselves all the time, because they don't know what could happen to them. It's a brave people to work there, brave people.
Are they scared?
Well, in Venezuela, there is two feelings that are the for everywhere, for everybody. is scared. People is scared. People is sad. People is scared because it's not only the repression of the government, it's the delinquency. I mean, Venezuela is a country taken by delinquency, and that's a policy of a state, so that the middle class go out of the country. Right now there is about 1,500,000, 1,600,000 people that have run out of the country, mostly middle class, and so it's not only what you see on TV about the lines and the shortage and things like that. I mean, the problem with the delinquency is unbelievable. We have the highest rates of murders, robbery, and kidnapping in the world, and that's people are scared of that.
Can you tell everybody why you're living in exile and how that came to transpire?
Well, they manage the judicial system. I mean, the judge in Venezuela they are a part of the government. So we published a year ago a dispatch that was published by ABC in Spain that say that an attorney, a public attorney in the state of New York, had opened an investigation on Diosdado Cabello for narcotráfico. And it was published by ABC, and we published the day after. As it was published by 90 newspapers in Latin America. It was published by Clarín, La Nación, Mercurio, everywhere. Everybody published that. Diosdado Cabello, he decided to sue me, the board of directors of El Nacional, and also the same thing with another newspaper that published that's the Teodoro Spekov newspaper that now disappeared, the newspaper, and a web page called La Patilla. They opened this, he opened that, and in Venezuela, when you have a trial, the judge he dictates, I don't know how you say it in English, medidas cautelares. That means all the 75 political prisoners. Now it's 85 because they took 10 more in the last thing that happened 2 days ago. They don't have a sentence. Only Leopoldo Lopez has a sentence, and you know what happened with that sentence. All the other political prisoners, they have medidas cautelares. So they are being judged, but they are in prison for medidas cautelares. There is some people who has 12 years medidas cautelares, 12 years, and the trial doesn't go to the end. I mean, the trial is stopped, and so when the judge takes some shoes, he take these medidas cautelares, and I mean, there is no way you can get out of this. So they opened this trial to us, and I was outside the country. I stay out.
Marty, the world should be watching this. Some of the people in the world are watching this, but we as Americans, we turn on CNN and we see Bernie Sanders and we see Donald Trump and we see Hillary Clinton. The Washington Post increasingly is an international paper. Its strategy is to be an international paper. What's our responsibility to report these stories and bring them to greater light?
Well, I think we have a tremendous responsibility. I can't say that the press in the United States has enough resources in Latin America in particular to cover what is happening there. We do the best we can with the resources that we have. But I think what's happening, we have had quite a few stories out of Venezuela. It's basically a failed state. And we've written about the threats to free expression there. We've also written about the collapse in living standards there and the chaos that's taken place there. So we've written that. We've done that from other countries. We've written, of course, out of Brazil. We've written out of Argentina. A lot of countries there to be paying attention to on that front. That said, I'm not sure that most Americans have any real appreciation for the threats that have taken place in Latin America or the overall economic situation in Latin America. Certainly the efforts that the governments have taken to restrict freedom of expression. It's something that I think, certainly on our editorial page, we've paid a lot of attention to it. We've been condemned by pretty much every government there. I think Correa has criticized us from Ecuador. Most recently, Chavez, again, has criticized us quite severely. And I think I view that as a badge of honor. But that is something that we ought to be doing. We ought to be doing. We ought to be paying more attention to what's happening there.
And it is a problem for American newspapers, American media with diminishing resources. How do you think about when you're trying to cover such a big region, even that it's our hemisphere, plus you're trying to cover the rest of the world, how do you think about making these editorial decisions?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. There's a lot for us to cover. It's a big world. And there's a lot happening in the world. We have people in Europe who are trying to cover multiple stories, whether it's the wave of refugees, whether it's the seeming possible imminent breakup of Europe, whether it's acts of terrorism. We have people who are covering wars that are seemingly endless in nature, acts of terrorism around the world. There's a lot for us to cover, and we have limited resources with which to do that. We can't do everything we want, even here in the United States. Obviously we wait for key news events to occur that can help us illustrate sort of the bigger issues that are at play. We've paid a lot of attention, of course, lately to what's happened in Brazil, and of course a lot of attention more recently to what's happening in Venezuela, and we sort of move from country to country. We have a correspondent who is based in Mexico. We have a correspondent on contract who is based in Brazil. We have one who is in Cuba who travels throughout Latin America, and then we send people there periodically to do particular stories. But there's no question it's a challenge. But to me, sort of what's happening, particularly with respect to freedom of expression in Latin America, it's a cautionary tale for what could happen, even here in the United States, given the kind of rhetoric that we've been hearing during the campaign. Hector was talking about that, alluding to that, I think, earlier. And it is concerning. And all we have to do is look at the countries in Latin America to see how things could unfold in a very negative way.
And certainly Hector, you talked about this a little bit, our government isn't paying as much attention to this hemisphere. Our government is paying attention to the Asia rebalancing or the Middle East. They're not necessarily watching as closely or devoting as many resources to this region. Is that problematic for journalistic coverage of this as well?
Well, some people in Latin America would say the opposite. The last trip the president made, President Obama went to Cuba, and from Cuba all the way down to Argentina in a quite successful trip, by the way. I also think that actually having Ricardo here, Clarín is a success story that needs to be looked at also, because it's in this neighborhood of intimidation to the media and journalists. Well, Ricardo can give us a little bit of what did you guys do to...
That's the question I want to ask him next.
Okay,
so you finish your question and I'll get to it.
Right. Well, what is it that you guys did that allowed Clarín first to survive and play a role in, a free election that ended one of those attempts at perpetuation that Miguel Henrique was talking about? That's the...
Well,
there is a lesson
he's
there.
asked us the question. So what made possible in Argentina such a shock? Two questions. What made such a shocking deterioration of press freedom during the Kirchner years? And then what were the main tools used by Clarín in its own efforts to resist these trends?
Bueno, la primera pregunta es, ya la contesté en la primera intervención. Creo que los Kirchner tenían desde el comienzo un proyecto de control del periodismo por varias vías. La compra el soborno y la compra indirecta de acuerdo a si daban publicidad del gobierno o no, de acuerdo a la línea editorial del periódico. Ese fue la primera, el primer dato. El segundo dato es que el régimen creado por los Kirchner no admitía voces disonantes y pensaban, equivocadamente, que todo el mundo tiene un precio. Quizás porque ellos valoraban mucho el valor. Con lo cual se encontraron con un sector del periodismo que tenía principios, algo que ellos carecían. Y ahí fue el primer choque vinculado entre una oferta de hacer negocios contra una resistencia por defender un modo de hacer periodismo con libertad. Y uno puede resumir ahí la razón de la resistencia. El espacio de libertad, que significa poder expresar una idea contra un intento de hegemonizar, homogeneizar políticamente a un país y tener una sola voz. Entonces, por supuesto que este lugar de resistencia nos llevaron a un lugar no querido por nosotros, que fue todos los días analizar no ya solo la noticia, sino cuál era la forma que nos iban a agredir. Esto me parece a mí que tuvo muchas consecuencias favorables para nuestro temple, algunas no tan buenas para la calidad de periodismo, y bueno, digo, uno tenía que optar entre la supervivencia y la teoría general. Yo pienso que el periodismo, no se puede hacer el mismo periodismo en todos los países, depende del contexto, y cuando aparece una veta de libertad hay que alimentarla. Y me parece que a veces la prensa americana tiene una equivocación general de juzgar con sus ojos lo que sucede en distintos contextos. Y a veces eso le produce desenfoques en su apreciación. Por otro lado, me parece también que el periodismo latinoamericano está más acostumbrado a este tipo de crisis. Nosotros tenemos una experiencia bastante cercana, pues tenemos un acuerdo con la Universidad de Michigan y todos los años los becarios de Michigan van a la Argentina a una inmersión de 10 días. Y siempre le ofrecemos algo, le ofrecemos un golpe de Estado, una devaluación, un cambio de gobierno, algo que en sus vidas de periodistas no han tenido nunca. Entonces están muy excitados. Entonces tenemos ese entrenamiento, nosotros tenemos. No sé si te contesté con esto.
Well, I wish I had that experience in journalism school. It would have been great. I think you did answer the question. But there's other, you're moving on, and there's another administration now, and there's news that goes on every day. Today, Americans aren't as aware of this as I know you are, but today in the Diplomat here in Washington reported that a space tracking and command facility operated by a unit of the Chinese People's Liberation Army is nearing completion at a site in Patagonia, Argentina. Critics in Argentina say sovereign territory has been turned over to the Chinese PLA, and this, of course, was a deal that was signed by the Kirchner administration. It's a 50-year deal. Is this a story that you're actively pursuing? This is a story that would be really interesting to my colleagues here at CSIS and Americans, but we're learning about it bit by bit.
Bueno, no es un secreto que China y Rusia se han acercado a América Latina en estos últimos años y que China sobre todo ha hecho acuerdos muy importantes con varios países de la región. particularmente con la Argentina, donde instaló una base satelital que está bajo control del ejército chino en Neuquén, en el sur de la Argentina. Es un convenio acordado con el anterior gobierno, cuyas consecuencias geopolíticas y estratégicas todavía se desconocen, pero efectivamente existe una base satelital que está controlada por el ejército chino en el sur de la Argentina, efectivamente.
It's interesting. How many reporters do you put on a story like that?
Uno. Hay uno.
And does that reporter cover that story extensively or on an ongoing basis? I mean, this is something that's being built. It's the Chinese People's Liberation Army is building a space satellite facility in our hemisphere. We're worried about what they're doing in the South China Sea, and meanwhile, just to our south, they're building the military is building something.
Bueno, están construyendo algo en base a un convenio acordado entre dos gobiernos. No están haciendo nada ilegal en ese territorio, es un convenio. Lo que ocurre es que hay una cuestión que va más allá, que es la relación de Argentina con China en el terreno económico y en los acuerdos que se establecieron durante el gobierno anterior, que incluyó esa base satelital. Y me parece que también hay mucho más de política doméstica en la discusión que de una cuestión internacional grave. Pero me da la impresión que la sociedad argentina no está tan preocupada por la base china, sino hay alguien más que está más preocupado que no son los argentinos.
I wonder if we're worried. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S.
I'm tempted to put two reporters on the subject.
I was going to say, yeah. Maybe. We can get you the satellite photos. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. media landscape, because you alluded to that before. You know, Fox News is reporting that the Obama White House is managing the media. And Donald Trump is accusing Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, of the Post being his political weapon. He actually said the other day that Bezos got the Post for nothing. I don't know if $250 million is nothing, but that's what Donald Trump said. Hillary Clinton's campaign says that she's subjected to disproportionately negative coverage. Is any of this accurate?
Well, I guess first of all, the fact that everybody seems to dislike us, that's a really good thing. So maybe it means we're doing our jobs correctly. Right. You know, I mean, I didn't actually expect to be talking about that discussion of free expression in the Americas, but I'm happy to. I mean, look, every campaign thinks that we're hostile to them. That is par for the course in a presidential campaign, and even during Senate campaigns and local campaigns and all of that. We should be looking thoroughly at all of these candidates. When someone aspires to hold the top position in the most powerful country on earth, the press has an obligation to do everything possible to look at every aspect of the life and career of that individual. If we didn't do that, that would be cause for concern. Doing that is not cause for concern. Obviously, we want to do it fairly, we want to do it honestly, accurately, and thoroughly, but we also want to do it unflinchingly. When we find out what's going on, we want to tell people what exactly we've found, without disguising the truth, without masquerading it in any way. So that's what we're trying to do. With respect to the allegations about our owner, Jeff Bezos, he hasn't given any instructions whatsoever to the Washington Post about how to cover this presidential campaign. As you might expect, there's deep experience at the Washington Post in covering presidential campaigns. They don't need lessons from our owner about how to do that. There's a long and deep tradition at the Washington Post of doing thorough examinations of presidential candidates, and that's what we are doing this year. We did decide a few months ago to do a book on Donald Trump. There have already been extensive biographies of Hillary Clinton. In 2007, there was a biography produced by Carl Bernstein, former investigative reporter for the Washington Post of Watergate fame. There was also a biography by Jeff Gerth and Don Van Natta, investigative reporters for the New York Times, and there was another biography as well right about that time. So there have been very deep biographies. But we haven't had anything very recent and very super thorough on Donald Trump, and this is an opportunity because we don't really know him that well. He has not been in public life. Hillary Clinton, of course, had been a First Lady. She'd been a U.S. Senator. She had been Secretary of State. She'd been a previous presidential candidate. So there were many opportunities to look into her life, and we will continue doing that. We do that now. We've done a lot of stories on her. But we decided to do a book. In order to do the book in a relatively brief period of time, and it's coming out in August, we had to assign a large team to look at limited aspects of his life. And so we did assign about 20 reporters to look at particular aspects of his life. Many of those reporters have already done their work and gone back to their regular assignment. They are not permanently assigned to covering Donald Trump. And we have a team of political reporters who rotate between Hillary Clinton and now still Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. And so it's the same team that essentially covers all of these candidates, and they rotate among them. And so, as I said, we see it as our obligation to take a thorough look at all of the candidates for president, and that's what we're doing. That's what we expect to continue doing, and the book will be quite thorough, and we think it'll be quite good.
I bet the Trump campaign is happy it's coming out in August instead of October.
Well, you'll have to ask them, but I assume so. It should come out as early as possible. It should come out as early as possible, sure. I think. If we could have it come out sooner, we would have. Yeah. But we did not necessarily anticipate that he would be the nominee. Right. We weren't sure enough, certainly, that we knew there was, of course, a high possibility of that happening, but not enough to persuade a publisher that they should take the risk of publishing a book. And we weren't entirely sure at the time we committed to doing the book either. But it's worked out that he's going to be the nominee of the GOP, and I think there should be a book that explores his life and career in depth.
Should be fascinating. I would love to be the first to offer you the opportunity to have your reporters come here and present the book.
Great.
We'd love to.
We'll take it.
We'd love to hear about it. How many reporters will have been involved in this book?
It's about 20. 24, something like that, reporters involved in the book.
Interesting.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
No, I'm dying to say this. I mean, if Ricardo's story that, when foreign journalists from Michigan go to Argentina, Clarín offers them to watch something they've never seen, coup, devaluations, etc. I think Marty should be thinking about the mirror image of that, to bring journalists from Rosario to watch Donald Trump, because that is something they will never see anywhere else either.
Right. Right. Maybe we'll have that scenario planning here in the United States. I think that would be interesting. Fortunately, we're not at that point.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was the Washington Post has a new media columnist, Margaret Sullivan, who's a veteran journalist, but she wrote her first media column yesterday in the Post and said that she's optimistic about young journalists and journalism. I wanted to ask each one of you, and we'll start with Miguel. Are you optimistic about the future of journalism in your country and in general?
Of course I am optimistic, because I think this regime won't last a long time. And in any case, things will go back to normality. That's one point in relation to Venezuela, which is in such a chaotic situation right now. But in the long run, everybody is suffering the migration to internet. And the migration to internet poses a lot of questions about journalists. Of course, right now, most of the important sources on internet come from traditional newspapers. I mean, people, I mean, there are lots of web pages, lots of people putting things in internet, but most of the content that people believe in comes from Washington Post, New York Times, and Nacional, Clarín, and all these newspapers. The immigration is a problem for our media because the business model is different. Nobody has been able to solve that question right now. But the other part of the question, which is who is the more powerful in terms of media influence, right now, traditional media, especially newspapers, has the power in this aspect internationally, everywhere.
Ricardo, are you optimistic? You've been through a period of difficulty and come out on the right side of it, strong news organization. Are you optimistic about the future of journalism?
Sí, soy optimista, pero creo que tenemos serias dificultades. Y dificultades no solo porque una de las plataformas tradicionales está perdiendo vigencia, como son el papel, el impreso, sino también porque hay una forma de periodismo que está cambiando y no sabemos hacia dónde y cómo. Por eso me parece que también las empresas que no adviertan rápidamente esta situación están muy cerca de extinguirse. Si no se incorpora la innovación como un elemento central en la vida de estas organizaciones, no hay posibilidad de supervivencia en cualquiera de las plataformas que uno opere. Pero también nosotros los periodistas tenemos un modo tradicional de manejar las noticias, sobre todo los que tenemos alguna edad y alguna experiencia en este tema, y que es una cultura. Y esa cultura que hemos adquirido durante mucho tiempo en las redacciones y en el modo de organizar el flujo de noticias, de organizar nuestra rutina personal y el modo de organización interna de las redacciones es en este momento un elemento conservador, una cultura conservadora que no está de acuerdo con la innovación necesaria para poder enfrentar los desafíos que tenemos. Y cualquiera que tenga la fórmula para enfrentar esta crisis y esta oportunidad, seguramente no lo va a decir acá, pero es cierto que si no hay búsqueda, nos vamos a ir extinguiendo de a poco y la multiplicidad de fuentes de información es tal que va a haber una anarquía informativa donde seguramente los buscadores de noticias van a ser los más grandes beneficiados. Tales como los motores de noticias, ¿no?
What does innovation mean to you in terms of your news outlet? Ricardo.
Bueno, significa estar dispuesto a cambiar una forma de hacer periodismo en medios que tienen mucho tiempo. Por ejemplo, Clarín tiene 70 años de existencia, el Washington Post algunos más, creo, ¿no? Y el Nacional también, con lo cual el primer punto es eso. El segundo punto es estar abiertos a las nuevas ideas, cosa que los periodistas a veces no estamos, y permitir que las nuevas generaciones también tengan la palabra. Esto es fácil decirlo acá, pero una cosa es decirlo acá y otra cosa es hacerlo en una redacción mientras uno hace un diario. Generalmente prevalece la cultura anterior a la nueva cultura y hay problemas. Pero creo que innovación es abrir la cabeza a lo que viene. Y uno se dice dispuesto, pero una cosa es decirlo y otra cosa es hacerlo. Y en esa tensión estamos.
Are you open to Snapchat?
No.
Hector, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Or?
I'm optimistic. My country is Argentina, by the way. And I'm optimistic for what Ricardo said at the beginning, actually. He said, well, not everybody has a prize. And if the editor of Clarín says not everybody has a prize, I'm optimistic. I cannot not be optimistic. I live in this country. People like Marty make me optimistic about the freedom of the press in this country, which I, of course, appreciate and enjoy. And I write for a Spanish newspaper, El País, and the editor there, the director, Antonio Caño, also makes me very optimistic. Sometimes people ask me about my column, what does Madrid say about my column? And nothing. Actually nothing. And Antonio Caño never changed a comma of any of my columns. And so that makes me optimistic on behalf of Spain. Let's put it that way.
Marty, are you open to Snapchat, and are you optimistic?
Yeah, we have a presence on Snapchat already, of course. I mean, we would love to even have a bigger presence there. So I am optimistic, and I always say that there's no acceptable alternative to being optimistic. You can't go to work every day thinking that you're going to fail. You have to go to work every day thinking you're going to succeed. I don't know anybody who's ever been a success who went into work every day thinking they were going to fail. So I think it's important that we be optimistic. And I think that we're in a period of ferment and experimentation in our business right now. And I think out of all that experimentation, certain models will emerge. I have confidence that will be the case. I agree with Ricardo that it's easier to talk about than it is to practice, to put into practice. But I do see evidence that people are learning what they need to do. And I think that we have done that in great measure at the Washington Post. We've made tremendous progress. And at one point actually passed the New York Times in terms of traffic here in the United States. That's not where we are right now. We're a little bit behind them, but it was quite an achievement to be able to do that. And we continue to introduce new products all the time. I think we have to recognize that what we're dealing with here, as Ricardo alluded to, is I think we're dealing with a new medium. The print newspaper is a certain kind of medium. Radio was a new medium, different from newspapers. Television was a new medium, different from radio and different from newspapers. And now along comes the internet, and what it has brought forth is a new medium, a new form of expression. And mobile devices may be different as well, maybe its own medium. And people there are looking for a different way of, different form of communication. You can't just take a newspaper story and read it on television. It doesn't make for good television. And you can't just take a newspaper story and put it up on the web and suggest that that's going to be successful on the web. So it's much more conversational. It's much more accessible. We use all of the tools that are available to us on the web now. Video, audio, original documents, annotations of the original documents, interactive graphics, animations, all of these different tools, many tools that are available to us now, and they can be very, very powerful storytelling vehicles. And they can actually enhance our credibility, because when we can put out original documents for people to read for themselves, they don't have to trust us that that's what the document says. They can go read it for themselves. And so there are a lot of advantages. First of all, we're reaching so many more people than we reached before. We can reach an audience that's worldwide, and there are tools that are available to us. The economic model is still in question, and notwithstanding all the people we're able to reach, the economics of digital platforms is still uncertain. But I think through all the experimentation, all the efforts that people are making, that we will find our way. And I think it's absolutely critical that we do. I think it's central to that the press is central to having a democracy, and it's central to getting at the truth, because right now, certainly in this country, and I suspect many others, people are drawn to sites that are propagating absolute falsehoods, conspiracy theories, and we even find politicians, I think in a very cynical way, embracing these falsehoods and these conspiracy theories because they advance their own ideological agenda. And I think it's important that we have institutions that have a history and a tradition of seeking the truth and are continually dedicated to getting at that and then to presenting it to the public.
Let's open it up to your questions. I believe we have a microphone. Kristen, right over here, sir, in the corner.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Philip French. I'm retired State Department. I'm currently teaching a course, a graduate seminar on U.S. Latin American relations for the Maxwell School for Syracuse University right here in this building, so this is very fortuitous to have you here. I have my students here as well, so thank you for being here. My question is the following. In these countries, in Bolivia, in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, the one argument you hear for that justifies supposedly the reason these governments are repressing the media or taking it over is because previously the media did its own self-censorship, tended to be and still tends to be dominated by a self-serving elite, they would say, that maintains the status quo and is more interested in doing that than in representing the whole of society. And in fact, even those sectors of society that felt marginalized by that model now argue that these countries or these governments better represent them in terms of their own interests as opposed to the oligarchical or elitist model previously. Would you subscribe to that at all? And if you don't, what would you do to reverse that perception? Thank you.
Ricardo, do you want to take that one?
Es difícil, un tanto amplia, pero quiero decir que, a ver, no todos la prensa en cada uno de los países representa exactamente lo mismo. Me pareció un error sacar un común denominador vinculado solamente con la pertenencia de la prensa como representante de un sector dominante dentro de un país. Y es posible que la descripción que has hecho responda a esa realidad en ciertos lugares de Centroamérica. Pero es también cierto que en otros países como Brasil, como Argentina, como Chile o Perú, la prensa representa distintas audiencias en la sociedad, que no todas forman parte de un sector que domina a otro dentro de una sociedad. Con lo cual, me parece un tanto aventurado hacer una generalización de ese tipo. La prensa efectivamente necesita un escrutinio de la sociedad y es cierto también que la sociedad es la que elige las audiencias. Los periódicos o los canales de televisión o las radios no imponen su mensaje sino si las audiencias no los eligen. Entonces, en ese sentido también hay que pensar que las sociedades no son tan manejadas por los medios como se piensa, sino que las audiencias muchas veces no están manejando a nosotros, sino que es el minuto a minuto en la televisión, sino es una desesperada forma de mantener a la audiencia con uno. Con lo cual me parece que en ese sentido hay que considerar más el poder de las audiencias que el poder de los medios. Una teoría tanto arriesgada, ¿no?
Yeah, Hector.
I can't help. I mean, I teach some of that stuff myself as well. If I could be blunt, that's a narrative. It's un relato in Spanish. These governments came to office in the most significant economic boom of international prices they ever had. They used all those resources to stay in office as long as they could. In that context, whoever criticizes is an enemy. How do we delegitimize that enemy? The oligarchs. The oligarchs are themselves. They created their own empires. They are vastly rich through corruption, most of those you mentioned. They wanted to appropriate media outlets that were critical to create their own media conglomerates, and they did, or to take over existing media conglomerates that had a price, as Ricardo put it. And all that in the name of a very distorted idea of equality, pseudo-socialism. The Chavistas are rich. They are the elite. There's so much literature that is just out of this world. So I think that it's time to deal with the mystification and call it for what it is.
Questions? Right back here.
Thank you. First of all, I want to give only recordative. Here is all the people of Clarín. I want to remember Ana Baron, that for many, many years she was here in Washington. And my question is this: the press in Argentina and also in Venezuela have become part of the justice system, because all the situations about the corruption cases and what's going on in many situations of the government have only been said in the press during the last 6 years. And the justice system is not working accordingly. So my question is this failure, you think it's going to, in the future, turn around? Or is, because if we are seeing that the justice system is following the press, and it should be in the other way. The press should follow the justice system, because all the corruption cases are in the newspapers. What's your point of view on this, if this is going to change in the future, or what's going on, especially in countries like in South America, right? Especially Venezuela, Argentina, and other countries.
First thing I have to say is that Chavez didn't arrive to Venezuela on a parachute. System was very bad. That's the reason why he came there. But right now, all the juridical system is organized on a judge appointed directly by the government on a political affiliation. I mean, there is no concourse. That doesn't exist in Venezuela. So all the judges are employees of the executive power. I mean, how to change that? But before that, it wasn't a very transparent system, even. So you have to change that. It's a process. There will have to be a appointed national court with very important people trying to find independent people, and then build up the systems of concourse and things like that appoint the proper judge. But that's a process. That won't be changed in a matter of days, of 1 year, 2 years. That's a difficult process, because the institutions in our countries are very weak. All the institutions. So we don't have the history that have all these countries, first world countries, and to build that up would take a big effort, and we'll have always the political influence to get people in the proper places and things like that. I mean, that's the history of Latin America.
We got time for one more question. Come in right here.
Hi, Cláudia Trevisan from the Brazilian newspaper Estado de São Paulo. It's a question to Marty. You mentioned the phenomenon of people being drawn to sites that propagate things that are not true. Now you have a presidential candidate that sometimes use social media to also propagate things that are not exactly true. I'd like to know, it's not a question of freedom of press, but the quality of the public debate. How does it affect it? And how challenging it is to cover a campaign with a candidate as Donald Trump?
Right. Well, this issue where, I think we've gone through a period where people are drawn to websites that affirm their pre-existing point of view. But I think there's something more concerning than that, is that people have been drawn to websites that present them with so-called facts, which are in actuality falsehoods, outright falsehoods. There are many of them. Certainly in the United States, that the president wasn't born in the United States, even though the evidence is that he was born in the United States. That the military exercise last year called Jade Helm was supposedly an effort by the administration to suspend civil liberties and produce a sort of a military takeover of the United States. Of course, that was not true. There's even an individual now who has a actually fairly popular website and popular radio show who contends that some of the mass shootings that took place here in the United States never occurred, that they were hoaxes, merely choreographed by the administration to advance the cause of gun control and even gun confiscation. That, of course, is not true. And deeply disturbing that those kinds of conspiracy theories would take hold. I think we have an obligation to call those things for what they are, absolute falsehoods, and to document how they are falsehoods. So we have things called fact checkers. This campaign, not just any one candidate, but a lot of the candidates have kept those fact checkers quite busy. We have 2 of those who are working full-time, maybe even overtime, to try to counteract these assertions out there. The problem is that a lot of people simply don't believe. They think we're part of the conspiracy. They think that we're part of keeping this information from them, and the very fact that A, we don't present them with this information, and B, that we try to document that this information is false, that would, in their eyes, be evidence of our participation in this conspiracy. I think this has a corrosive effect on our democracy. I think it's deeply concerning. I think for all the other challenges that we have in our industry, this may be the greatest challenge to our profession, and perhaps one of the greatest challenges to democracies generally, is that people are just drawn to, we used to have a senator here in the United States, late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He used to say, you are entitled to your own facts, but you're entitled to your own opinions, but you are not entitled to your own facts. Now people believe they are entitled to their own facts. And when you have an environment where we can't agree on even a baseline set of facts, how do you have a democracy? We could disagree in the past, we could disagree on the analysis, we could disagree on the interpretation, we could disagree on the prescription for solving a problem, but fundamentally we agreed on the baseline set of facts. Now we can't even agree on that. And so it makes certainly reporting in this kind of environment especially challenging, because we can spend an enormous amount of time documenting the truth, doing an honest and honorable job and presenting it to the public, and it will, with great frequency, be dismissed because it doesn't correspond to somebody's pre-existing point of view and information, which happens to be falsehoods, that they're receiving from other sources. So it is a very challenging time, no question about it.
I think that's a great spot to end, and I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank all of you for coming out today. With your applause, will you please thank our terrific panelists for this discussion?